7 speakers today and 2 songs, followed by Katie and Drew, who will share their memories. And in some way, we're going to try and touch on a small piece of the magic that was Alan Purdy's life. And all of you come from different directions in Alan's life, but I can tell you the 7 speakers, Katie and Drew and myself, add up to 430 years of familiarity with the guy that we know as Al or Alan or J. Alan Purdy or Doc. We will hear stories of things he did, grandpa to Jaden and Kennedy, mentor to many, ice climbing, sailing, travel, reach for the top, many awards, woodworking, scouting, kayaking, learning Spanish and motorcycles to better assist in underprivileged countries. What didn't he do? The ground rules today: applause is welcome and invited. There's so much to celebrate in Alan's life. Here today are Alan's sister Elizabeth Cook from Calgary and niece Heather Shear, sister and brother-in-law Gail and Dave Breo, and Alice Jew of San Francisco. Katie's husband Chris and her parents-in-law Barbara and Roger Gentilini are here from Michigan. And a special mention of Drew's sister-in-law and family from Fort St. John, who canceled a luxury cruise to the sunny Caribbean in order to attend today. This is kind of where applause would be appreciated. Alan's life spanned from World War II and included post-war Vancouver growth, $15,000 houses, 29-cent a gallon gasoline, the haze of beehive burners along the Fraser, and the industrial use of the False Creek shores. While in grad year at David Thompson, and all his lifelong friends heard the music of Leslie Gore, It's My Party, Ray Charles, I Can't Stop Loving You, the Beatles, I Saw Her Standing There, and the Crystals, And Then He Kissed Me, and so many more. By now you've read that while all this lovin' was going on, Al was grad valedictorian and competed on Reach for the Top, waiting 6 years until 1969 to fall in love with Joan, shortly after Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. 1969 was also Sesame Street's first appearance on PBS and the year of Easy Rider and Woodstock. I did, though, note a David Thompson annual where Alan was called Hot Lips. A full 7 years ahead of the MASH hit movie. He attended UBC Medical School, studied internal medicine at VGH and chest medicine in Edinburgh before settling down in White Rock in 1973 with Joan, his wife of now over 47 years. 1970, yeah. You know, and you look around this room, and I've talked to a few of you today, and it's amazing when you add up the number of years that we all knew Alan, but it's also amazing how many 40 and 50-year marriages are in this room, and how many people have a base of Vancouver, White Rock, Langley, South Surrey. It's an incredible gathering that we have here today. 1973, when he came to Peace Arch from Edinburgh, the year Secretariat won the Triple Crown. The Vietnam Peace Accord was signed. The World Trade Center was constructed. And in White Rock, we had a dirt sidewalk on the west side of Johnson Road. Come to think of it, we have one on the west side and the east side now, and in the middle. We had only one blinking traffic light, and it wasn't at King George and 152nd. We had no Semima Mall. An acre of land 2 years earlier had cost $7,000 around Earl Marriott School. Yet Alan was willing to come here and set up practice with Hilltop Medical. Alan was one of the smartest people I ever met. He was a listener, forever a student, always learning, and therefore a teacher. He was a mentor to many of you in this room. And he was forever a recruiter of doctors to Peace Arch Hospital, to Hilltop Medical Clinic, to underdeveloped countries, and to Hay River, Northwest Territories. We're going to hear some more stories now, starting with Teresa Hotel. And Teresa, I think you can catch up to her accent. For those of you from Newfoundland, you shouldn't have any problem. Teresa's been here for many, many years now and is a leader in hospice care in this community, but has done so much more and should be really appreciated as a member of this community for at least the last 45 years or more. I think you met Alan as an emergency room nurse. Alan wasn't the emergency room nurse, Teresa was. When Alan was a medical student at VGH. So the history is long, and welcome, Teresa.
I'm honored that Joan, I forgot I had this in my hand.
Very close.
I'm used to yelling and not, but thank you, Joan, for inviting me to do this, although I have to say that this is probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And for the past week, I have spent a lot of time every day writing, thinking, and I finally came to the conclusion in my frustration is that there are no words, none, that can tell you about Alan. Alan is an experience. Each of you, well, in many ways, each of you has your own unique and special experience of Alan. And I hope that today you'll be able to share that with others here. And I can only share with you my experience of Alan. It was a heart connection, and I met Alan in 1972 at VGH. He was a resident in internal medicine, and I was a nurse in emergency there. And for all of you doctors who know what nurses are like in emergency, you know, we thought we were whipping these guys into shape. My first remembrance of Alan is of his calmness, you know, in emergency. He usually got called down in a critical situation. He was always very calm, and he had that sense of humor always there at the end of a time with a patient. And so I saw him many times, but didn't really have much time to talk with him. But then we met again in 1974 at Peace Arch Hospital Emergency, and I was working part-time there. And Alan, of course, was a family physician. And my memory of him holds true to that time, and I do need to look at my notes because it's I'm a bit nervous. But through that week of thinking, a song kept coming through my mind over and over again. I couldn't shake it, and the song was from The Sound of Music, and the line that stuck with me was, "How can you hold a moonbeam in your hand?" And that spoke to me in a way that I can't be trying to come up with words that describe how I feel about Alan. Alan accepted me and affirmed me always. And he was like that with other people. I saw that. He was always able to make me laugh, and especially to laugh at myself. Alan loved and appreciated women a great deal. And it was a good thing because he was surrounded by them at Peace Arch Hospital. But he had wonderful relationships with women there. He teased us and he had easy banter, and every experience with Alan was always a good experience. He had a keen intellect, as many of you know, and he and I, over dinner, when Joan and Alan and my Alan and I got together, we had many debates, and he was calm and reasonable, and I was excitable and categorical. So you can imagine how that conversation would go. But we always ended up laughing at our seriousness. One of the things I loved most about Alan was his mischievous nature. And I think many of you have been a recipient of that. I was not the only person at Peace Arch Hospital to be put in a tub full of water with all my clothes on. But I think I was probably the only person who was tied to a stretcher with an IV pole and a catheter and put in the front lobby of the hospital. And who was the mastermind behind getting Stan Briggs, here, Stan, whom many of you know, but I used to think I was the same height as Stan, but I just discovered today we are in fact the same height. But who was the mastermind in getting Stan to dress up in a nurse's uniform and get him into a pair of extra large ladies' nylons and put him in a box and wheel him out? In fact, it may have been this room, but it was an event here. And with the assistance of Grant Gibbings, had him jump out of a box as a nurse facsimile of moi. So needless to say, we had lots of happy, fun times with Alan. And I don't know if I ever found out what he did with those 2 ducks that Stan put in his car at his 39th birthday. As a doctor, he had no equal. And I have told Alan many times, and I told many patients, people who were looking for a doctor, that in my estimation, Alan was the best physician in White Rock. And I stand by that. He had always, with patients, he had a calm and relaxed and curious attitude. And underlying that was always this, and I'm sure you will recognize this softness and lightheartedness that underscored everything that he did and that endeared people to him. This allowed him, in serious situations, at the end of them, to be able to assure people and offer a sense of humor. I remember an example of that was when the hospital was little, it was a 3-bed room in Peace Arch in emergency, and Alan was seeing a patient in the middle bed. And I happened to be in the room attending to other patients, and I heard him chatting with this patient, taking his history. And then I heard him ask the patient how long it had been since he had seen a physician. And the patient said to him, 35 years. And in true Alan style, he said, "Good for you for keeping out of the way of doctors for 35 years." So the other thing I noticed, and I think it's already been mentioned, I think there's going to be lots of repetition, but Alan really listened to you. He listened intently to what you had to say. He considered it. He was never quick with a response, and he was the same with his patients. And he listened intently to them, and he always had an easy manner of explaining things thoroughly to his patients. My mother-in-law was one of his patients, so I know this from the patient angle. More recently, the first time I talked to Alan after his diagnosis, what he said to me was, and this epitomizes Alan, I think. He said, "Teresa, I've had a good life. I've done everything that I wanted to do, and it's okay." And my heart was so sore, but I also felt, this is incredible. This guy is incredible. I think he lived life fully, and he lived the process of dying fully too. My admiration for him is unbounded. The most profound experiences of my life were with Alan. I have been with many, many people as they died, but I have never had the experience of being with someone like Alan. All through his illness and up until just weeks before he died, the last time I saw him, he was no longer conscious, but prior to that, he was still very present, very solid in his being. And he was worrying about me because I had been a bit late. But he was so gracious and wanted to make sure everything was okay with me. His concern was for me and not for him. One of the other things I admired about that process that he went through was his curiosity, his acceptance of it, but his curiosity about the disease. And he was keeping up with what was going on with that tumour. And I remember one day being over with Joan and Alan, and I think Yvonne might have come over that day, one of those days that I was there, and Alan was saying to her, listen, I've not just got one nurse looking after me now, I've got two. This is a challenge. The other thing is he was so open-minded. You know, he became the perfect patient. And I think that that's a very difficult thing for a physician to do, or a nurse for that matter. But he was so amenable and went along with, well, obviously he would go with his treatment, but Joan had a curiosity about other things, and she had discovered a ketogenic diet, and the other thing was cannabis. And there is lots of work being done in that area. But Alan was willing to be a recipient of a ketogenic diet, which Joan worked very hard for. And he also took cannabis, and some of the data is showing that cannabis and ketogenic diets kill cancer cells. He will live always in our memory. He will not be forgotten. He's a part of us. And he's a part of me, and he's a part of you. And I know that, and I'm reassured by it. And when I think of Alan now, I smile. I have sad moments, but I smile because of the joy that he brought into my life. Joan has asked me to read an email that I sent after the last time I saw Alan, and I think it's a fitting end. Dear Joan and Alan, it was so good to be with you today. Thank you so much for the privilege of accompanying you both on this most important journey. I am honoured to be counted as a friend, and I'm so grateful for all the years of special connection and love. Alan always lightened my spirit, and he continues to do so now. I am in awe of you both. I pray that love and light surround you both always, and may Alan's transition be peaceful, and may he be received into the deepest and most profound love, which indeed is his own true nature. May the knowledge of this sustain you and your family in the times ahead, with great love and appreciation.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Teresa's a bit shy. Teresa needs major accolades for recognizing the need for hospice care and leading a facility like Irene Thomas Delta Hospice would never have been thought about in 1982. Teresa, in starting White Rock Hospice in 1982, recognized the need for pain management, recognized the need for dignity as you died, and Teresa is a major component of this community and a major reason why the Peace Arch Hospital today is growing a new hospice ward. Before we go on too far, there are so many people to thank for daily visits over the past year. I think you all know who you are, but you also know that each of those visits was appreciated, and the warmth and the love and the friendship that was shown was passed on to Alan, to Joan, to the family, I would really like to recognize Brian and Madeline Bell, who daily visited Alan. Thank you. Brian has been Alan's great friend since grade 7, and Brian and Madeline have celebrated 46 years of Christmas Eves with Joan and Alan. Also sister and brother-in-law, sister-in-law and brother-in-law, Gail and Dave Brayo, Brian and Ann Prentice, Stan Briggs, Jean Mercer, along with a cast of many, many more in this audience, just made those days pass with love and friendship. So thank you all for those visits and for the kindness that you showed. Next on the podium is going to be Dr. John Campbell, another grade 7 friend of Alan. He attended rival school John Oliver, and I think David Thompson was new I've forgotten what year, but it was new about that time when Alan started high school. So their boarder created division in this friendship, which they continued on the basketball court and continued their long friendship with attending university and medical school together. Alan also recruited John into the Hay River medical team. So John, would you please come forward and have a few words? We're happy to have John here because he went to Newlands first, so we're thrilled to have him here.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Joan, for giving me this opportunity. I've known Al for 60 years, and I'm not going to go into, there's so many positive things about him, I'm not going to say any because you'll probably hear some of them. But one of the things that he wasn't was very coordinated. Al wanted to play basketball, and fortunately he was tall, because if he had been short, he would have never made a team. And he and I met first playing basketball at David Thompson's school in the summertime. I lived not that far from him, but we went to different elementary and high schools. But we had a great rivalry playing basketball, and then when our school teams met each other, it was even more fun. Al was always very organized, and what surprised me with how advanced his thinking was. And this particularly came the case with his name, Pretty. And one day I said to him, I thought that he wasn't maybe all that pretty, and that I suggested maybe that he change his name to something more appropriate. I forget what he said to me, but it probably wasn't very nice. And quite a few years ago, Joan and Katie came along, and the name turned out to be absolutely perfect. So I think it's really great that they kept the name. As you probably heard, they met in 1969, it's actually September, and then Al was going to intern in San Diego. At that time, cohabitation outside of marriage in our society was not quite as accepted probably as it is now, so they had a bit of a dilemma. But fortunately, another classmate, Al and Gail Wetter, were also interning in San Diego. So I'm going to give Al credit for this, but maybe Joan deserves the credit. Joan told her parents that she was going down to visit Al and Gail Wetter in San Diego. Al and Gail lived in a one-room apartment with a newborn baby. She had several visits down there. She did visit with the Wetters, but she didn't sleep there. So it was a very convenient story. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So Al recruited me to Hay River, and we had some great times up there. Sometimes we roomed together, and sometimes we had separate rooms, and sometimes my wife Ginger came up. Ginger and Al always got along well, One of the interesting stories is that when I first introduced Ginger to Al, and I can't remember the circumstances, he always was very smart, but he also wanted to try to remember her name. So anyway, when other classmates came in contact with Al, he told them how he had met my new wife, Pepper. Other people have done that with her name. They put a spice in there, and she's been called nutmeg, cinnamon, but this was the first pepper. My wife Ginger would often come up to Hay River with me, and if Al was there, it was a really good deal for Al because he got to have some free suppers on a regular basis, and so she did a lot of the cooking for him. One time I was there and he wasn't there, but he was coming up, so he emailed me about what kind of groceries that I could maybe get because his plane was going to come in late. I felt like I was talking to my wife with the detail about what kind of orange juice and what brand of this or that or the other thing. Fortunately, it wasn't much of a problem in Hay River because I didn't have a choice of very much to pick from. Our most interesting experience with Al up there was we were sitting and having lunch in our room. In barges Al, and he looks around and he doesn't say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong room." He says, "What are you two doing sitting here and eating my food?" he took the offense right away. So anyway, he certainly was a great guy. He and I had a lot of great times together. We downhill skied, we cross-country skied, and we actually learned some Spanish together. Al was very well read as well, and one time he asked me what I knew about the Federal Reserve Board of the U.S., and I said not much, so he said, "Here's a book from Alan Greenspan. Joan, I still have the book. If you'd like it back, you're welcome to it." So, anyway, he was a great guy, and I'm certainly going to miss him.
Thanks, John. A lot of you were patients of Ellen, and you've got your own special stories. My special story was when I was about 45, I'd go in and say, "I've got a pain in the," and Mary Lou would say, "He is a pain in the," but I'd say, "I've got a pain here, a pain here, a pain here." He said, "Get used to it, you're getting old." Major medical advice from my favorite doctor. He was a strong believer in the patient's knowledge of his or her own body, and was a listener first and a doctor second, which I think attributed to his success. Next speaker is a little intimidating for certain people on first dates. Drew, meeting Ashley and wanting to go out on a first date, had to go be introduced to a retired police officer from the K-9 squad in Vancouver. And at the top of the stairs, with a police officer and two police guard dogs sitting on the side, Ace was one of the dogs, I don't know the other dog's name, but can you imagine saying, "Sir, I'd like to take your daughter out on a first date," and him saying, "If you get her back by 7:30. But I would think that would be one of Drew's most intimidating times, but it's worked out really well, and Ashley and the kids, we appreciate what Reg said to you, whatever it was that day. Reg, could I have you come forward, please? Reg Forster, everyone.
First of all, I'd like to begin to say how much of a great honor it is to be asked to speak here today at Alan's Celebration of Life. And it truly is a chance for us all to celebrate a man that has touched us all in so many different ways, either as a colleague, as a patient, as a friend, and as a family member. In case you don't know me, I'm Drew's father-in-law, and I met Alan and Joan when Ashley was in the early stages of dating Drew about 10 years ago. That was when And when it was sooner or later, it was time to meet Drew's parents, Joan and Alan, and we invited them over to our house for a family Christmas dinner. And our family Christmas dinners are usually about 30 people. We invite everybody. And I won't lie, I was quite intimidated and nervous to meet and try to entertain a doctor. I mean, you don't usually hang out with a doctor, and mostly a cop, because we usually give you patients, not... So, what do you talk to a doctor about besides aches, pains, medical stuff, and which I didn't know anything of. But it took no time to realize how outgoing Alan was and how easy he was to talk to. An immediate friendship was formed, and the Prittys soon became part of our family, and we became part of theirs. One thing that surprised me that brought Alan and I together was his love for motorcycling. Who would have thought of a doctor endorsing anyone to ride a motorcycle or drive on himself? I just started riding a bike again, and Alan started, and I started going out on rides together. And I learned much about Alan on all these little trips that we went on. His love of travel, his attention to detail, his love of the country and the outdoors, his knowledge of the great eating spots all over the town. Like he knows every mom and pop hole in the wall but all good food. And his knowledge of the back roads to anywhere. Our adventures took us on all kinds of road trips. The Duthie Lake Road a few times, a 4-day trip with Joan and my wife around Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast. Joan, you were a good sport. A couple-day trip through Washington State, and tons of day trips to different eating establishments and back road riding. It was on these trips that I started to learn about the real Alan Pritty. There wasn't a local trip we took that past patients didn't stop and shake his hand and thank him for everything he had done for them. Alan had a remarkable memory. He remembered everybody's name, their medical history, the names of related family members, and it was nobody forgot Alan Pritty. On one occasion, a couple came up to our table when we were sitting in Fort Langley having a breakfast and a coffee. They gave him a big, huge embrace, repeatedly was shaking his hand and kept thanking him over and over for everything he had done for them. When they had left, Alan later explained to me that he had diagnosed the couple's son with a terminal illness and quite a few years back, and that son had since passed away. The gratitude and respect that couple showed Alan was beyond belief. Our trip to Washington State, Alan took me first to Hope. Not once did we touch one of the main roads, where he had a great breakfast in some mom and pop cafe that he had discovered. Then we headed through Manning Park, then headed south towards Washington State. We crossed the border at a border crossing called Nighthawk. The border crossing in the middle of nowhere. We were likely the only ones that have driven through there in the last hour. Al and I were told to get off our bikes and take our helmets off, and he was going through our bikes, and we were really getting the 1-2 by the U.S. Border Guard. And then he asked what we did for a living. I replied, I was a police officer. Alan replied he was a doctor. The border guard looked at us with a puzzled look, and he said, "That is a strange mix, a cop and a doctor." and you'll all know, you'll all remember this face, because and Alan had it all the time. Without hesitation, he replied, and I'm going to quote, "This fine man let his daughter marry my son, and I am forever in his debt." Then he gave him the Alan Pritty look and the little quiet chuckle that he had. The guard laughed and let us proceed without any more interrogation. Every motorcycle trip with him was an adventure, and I will never find another riding partner like him. And for sure, I will never find half the roads that we rode on. I was always amazed at how much Alan was a stickler to detail and perfection in everything he did. I once watched him hand sharpening the blade to his wood plane. Most people would have spent 5 minutes, where Alan spent an hour. By the time he was done, the blade could have been used as a surgical instrument and would likely be classified as a prohibited weapon under the Criminal Code of Canada. If you ever get a chance to look at go down into his garage and look at a handmade kayak that's hanging there, it will tell you wonders about the man. The attention to detail of that kayak and everything is to be in awe of. The kayak should be in the Adventure Hall of Fame. And from what I have heard, that's the characteristics that made him the fabulous physician he was. A man of perfection and detail. He left no stone unturned. And I had no medical dealings with Alan. Alan's love of knowledge was evident. I have heard many stories about his medical wisdom and him being in front of the wave of medical advances. If Alan didn't know something, he either went back to school to learn it or researched it on his own and became an expert. An example for me was just 2 years ago. Alan's motorcycle timing on his new-to-him bike was off just a little. He not only learned how to properly adjust the timing on his bike, he went back to school and took a motorcycle maintenance course. He wasn't satisfied in knowing just how to fix the timing. He wanted to know everything about that bike. And his memory was second to none. Alan had more information stored in his head than a dozen people combined. In fact, that's why Alan was bald. His head needed more room for storage, so his hair molecules had to go. I wish I could say the same. And his temperament. Nothing seemed to faze that man. Alan never got overly excited. I never saw him mad. I'm sure if you hooked Alan up to an emotional monitor for a considerable length of time, his readings would fluctuate very little. In a medical term, he would probably flatline. Nothing fazed him. I could go on forever about Alan, but I promised Joan I would keep it short. Joan, you are a truly remarkable woman. You never left Alan's side for the 4 months he was in hospice, sleeping on a pull-out bed every night and attending to his wants and needs. As I have told you in private, you have earned your wings. Alan touched a lot of our lives. It was evident by the lineup of visitors he had every day at the hospice. His first cousin, Alice has flown in again, flew in a charter plane from San Francisco and parked a limousine out in front of the hospice for 4 hours while she visited Alan, jumped back in the limo, went back to the airport, and flew back to San Francisco. She has flown up again here today. Alice, you were the talk of the hospice for weeks. If someone deserved to live to the ripe old age of 100, it was Alan. He gave so many years to this community here in White Rock in helping people and asked nothing in return. Katie, there's one regret your dad had, and that was not being able to walk you down the aisle. He had mentioned this to me several times, and I know he has talked to Drew and passed on the duties. To your husband, Chris, and Chris's parents who flew in this weekend from Maui and Michigan State, respectively, in attend today's ceremony, everything you have heard about Alan is true. Although physically Alan is gone, but in our hearts and souls, Alan will never be forgotten. Alan was one in a million, and we all were fortunate to be part of his lives. Thank you.
Reg, thank you very much. And I think it goes, maybe we need to say it to while Alan felt bad about not being able to walk Katie down the aisle. Having Chris in Katie's life completed Alan's circle of life. We're going to pause for a song, and we have a trio, Grace Gauthier, who has known Alan since 1977 when she got married to Ken, Alan's kitty corner neighbor, whose mom was like, I guess for Helen Pretty and for Ken's mom, they were like Lucille Ball and Ethel. So there's a long-standing history between Grace and Alan. Grace brings with her Mike Angel and Angela Morrissey to sing What a Wonderful World. Just so you know, we're not going to be singing Amazing Grace today due to conflict of interest. And I want you to know too that in 1967, this song was released. It won a Grammy in 1999. It was written specifically for Louis Armstrong in respect of his ability to bring together people from different walks of life, especially during the Vietnam War. And I feel like it's so appropriate seeing everyone here and how everyone here was brought together with a common Alan Pretty. Grace. I wanted to right now pause and recognize Dr. Grant Gibbings, who in 1973 was about to head to Hilltop Medical Clinic and join as an associate, but happened also to be a farmer and a crop duster and a pilot, and crashed his plane and almost died. Suffered injuries that kept him in the hospital for 3 months and laid up for about a year, and as a result, Valerie Lawson, the business manager at Hilltop Medical Clinic before Yvonne McLeod, gave Alan a call in Edinburgh and convinced him to take up practice in White Rock instead of continuing his research and studies in internal medicine and chest medicine. Without Grant Gibbings crashing and almost dying, we would not, many of us in this room would not have known Alan Pretty. So, Grant, thanks for crashing. You should also know that Grant and Burl's daughter Jill earned her pilot's license, but I think it was only on condition that she never get too close to crops. We are now going to hear from another longtime friend. I'm going to stop saying that because it's just continuous throughout this day. But Dr. Dorothea Bergen, who received her Doctor of Medicine after studying at University of Manitoba and then went back and took up psychiatry at Memorial University from 1985 to 1988. Great friend to Alan, has done many trips, and Dorothea is going to give us a great update on her life with Alan. Dorothea? Can I hold it or have it in here?
This is good. Yeah, thank you. Alan was my colleague, and I was Alan's friend. And that was a privilege and something that was very enjoyable over the years. But I'm going to have to admit to you that it was actually often a very humbling experience. For instance, I used to think I was reasonably bright. Then there was Alan. A number of years ago, as we've heard about other areas of his life, Alan decided he wanted to know a little bit more about computers. So does Alan take a basic How Do Computers Work course? No. Alan enrolls in computer programming courses, course after course. He attains year 3 in computer programming. I once made the innocent mistake at lunch of asking Alan exactly what it was he was studying. And I can safely assure you all that even today, I do not understand one single thing he tried to teach me that day. Alan was a voracious nonfiction reader, not like the rest of us. And in university days, Alan decided he wanted to learn to ski. He hadn't been afforded that opportunity in childhood. So in typical Alan fashion, he goes to the library, gets a book on skiing, takes it home, and I'm sure very carefully from cover to cover studied that book, takes himself to the slopes of the North Shore Mountains, and whoosh, down those expert levels. That tumbles into him becoming ski patrol, which he did part-time for a number of years afterwards. Alan decided to become fluent in another language in the last decade plus of his life, so he studied and he became fluent in Spanish, as we've already heard. For me, Alan was the true intellectual man. Then there's adventuresome spirit. Again, I used to think I was a bit adventurous. Then there's Alan. Well, a number of years ago, I had the privilege of Alan and I going on a trip to Peru. It was with a humanitarian organization out of Utah. Joan had actually linked us up to it. It was a wonderful thing she did for us. And with this team, we actually did traveling medical dental clinics through remote areas of Peru. We got the opportunity to go up and down the Amazon. Believe it or not, Alan and I did public health visits to people who live on wooden platforms deep in the Amazonian jungle. During that trip along the Amazon, we got to go to a very unorthodox zoo. You don't just look at the animals, you get up close and personal. And I can tell you, we both hugged a sloth. Now, if you want to know what that's like, the sloth is the longest, slowest hug you're ever going to have in your whole life. We got to climb to the top of Machu Picchu. It was wonderful. You can tell by my enthusiasm, it was a trip of a lifetime for me. For Alan, it's like dipping his toe in the water. So Alan decided Peru was a pretty cool place. So Alan goes back for repeated trips. He goes and does all the hikes around Machu Picchu. He goes and sees all the sites. He goes to language school, and not just language school, cultural school in Cusco, till he becomes fluent both in Spanish and a lot of the culture. So after he attains all this incredible experience and has these adventures under his belt, what would Alan do? Well, Alan, of course, would turn around and want to share that with the people that he loved. He arranged a 1-month itinerary trip for his sister and brother-in-law. We heard their names, Gail and Dave. And they themselves, even though they're world travelers, to this day say it was the best trip of their life. Well, part of that trip, Joan also followed in and joined up with them, and the four of them got this great opportunity to go sand dune buggy riding. Now, first of all, I didn't even know there was a desert in Peru, but apparently there is a very big one with massive sand dunes. And so the guy takes them up this very steep slope up to the top of this sand dune and says, now you all have an option of trying sandboarding. And I think you saw slides of that here. So now Joan and Gail and Dave are kind of considering this, deciding, is this lethal? You know, what cost to life or limb would this be? They'd actually just watched somebody totally take a tumble down the sand dune from a different group. Well, as they turn around to get Alan's opinion, whoosh, Alan is on this board and he's flying down this amazingly steep slope there in the Peruvian desert. Alan was a wonderful person about sharing his adventures. I think there's more than one person in this room that got to go on the kayaking trips that he organized in the Pacific Northwest. There's many, many other adventures that he went on in trips, and some of which you've heard alluded to, and some may more that you will hear. But lastly, and maybe most importantly, I want to tell you about courage, because I consider Alan to be one of the bravest men I have ever known. And I'm talking about the last year of his life. A year ago, summer, as most of you know, he was given his diagnosis of the glioblastoma, and then months later, as is typical for that tumor, he was given the news that no further treatment would readily be of any help to him. And so then Alan had some choices about how to have the remainder of his life go. And Alan chose to be present for every last moment he could, to be with the people that he loved, to allow his love and for them to spend time with him, to meet that new son-in-law, to have another year with those grandchildren. But you know, that was a big choice, because that choice had a great risk attached to it, because that very tumor threatened at any time to take away Alan's intellect, to take away Alan's personality, or even to take away his awareness of himself and others. And I believe that Alan was honored for the choice he made, because Alan, as you've already heard, was completely Alan. And that room in the Irene Thomas Hospice Center was a room full of love and life, not death. As you've already heard others mention, you went there and you had the quintessential hosts, Alan and Joan, welcome you into the room, asking how you are, making sure you're okay, introducing you to other guests, making sure everybody's comfortable there. I also experienced something very unique in that room on my joyful visits. There was this amazing sense, it was palpable in the air, of just this sense of warmth and love and goodwill among people. And Alan afforded us that opportunity to share in that experience. It was a memorable experience I will carry for the rest of my life. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Dorothea. Following Dorothea, we're going to hear from Dr. Glenn Anderson, who followed at Peace Arch Hospital as medical director after Alan. Glenn was a great community, medical, and church leader in this community, and this community is way better off for having had Glenn in the community since 1973. Glenn? I think it was 1973.
It's an honor to be here, and all of us here are the recipients of Alan's grace and love for all of us. Many of you are patients, and when I came to White Rock, actually Alan and Joan and Lorna and I came and started at Peace Arch the same week in 1973. And I was brought out here by Bill Laskowski, who was to White Rock Medical. We sort of referred to White Rock Medical as the A team and Hilltop as the B team, but I'm not sure it wasn't the other way around. But one of the first people that I met in the hospital was Alan. And Alan and I just instantly became friends. And it was just a privilege to work with him for all of these years. Alan joined Hilltop Clinic and to work with Stan Briggs, and a couple of years later Grant came, and they became, the three of them became great friends and leaders of that clinic. And Stan, it's good to see you here. Stan took great care of my mother for the years that she was alive, and I've always appreciated you, Stan, for your care for my mom. And Alan, you were a great doctor, and I entrusted you with my wife. And you took care of my dear Lorna for all the years that you were here. And I respected you. And Joan and I became good friends as we worked. I took a strong interest in nutritional medicine, and Joan and I worked together on many, many years. And then I came out in 1973 as well and joined White Rock Metal to join Bill Laskowski. And a couple of years later, Dave Anderson came on and Jerry Roberts. And this sort of opened up a whole new era of mutual respect and cooperation between the two principal clinics in White Rock. And my best memories, some of my best memories of the early years are just being in the hospital late at night or early in the wee hours of the morning, just sitting down with Stan or Grant or Alan or whoever and just chatting. We were up there at emergency or in the case room or wherever. Grant, I'll never forget, you bailed me out of so many situations in the case room. Just great experience, but the cooperation between the two and the respect that we had between the groups was just really quite remarkable and thrilling. And I have loved medicine in White Rock. It's just a unique and always has been a very, very special place to work. So working together, we brought us closer. We had amazing times and conversations, special memories that we share as physicians. In 1986, I had a phone call from a Dr. Andy Bishop. Andy Bishop was the director of a medical relief organization called Kama Services that was working on the Thai-Cambodian border with Cambodian refugees. Kama Services was the medical arm of the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is the church denomination that I've been associated with my entire life. My father was an Alliance pastor. And the Peaceport Alliance Church that most of you know is part of that. And Lorna and I have gone there with Dave and Jeanette since the inception. But anyway, Andy called me, and he was the director of this relief organization. We worked under the umbrella of the United Nations Border Relief Operation. There were several camps in the Thai-Cambodian border with Cambodian refugees having poured over into Thailand, and they set up a series of camps. And Kama Service was responsible for the medical care in Site 8. There was Site 1, Site 2, Site 10, and so on. But Site 8 was their responsibility. They were desperate for a doctor because one of the doctors who'd been there was ill. And so Andy phoned me and said, could I come for 3 months? Well, I had commitment, clinic responsibilities, and I had 2 little kids and everything else. And I said, well, Andy, I can't come for 3 months, but I tell you what, leave it with me and I'll make arrangements for the 3 months. So as it turned out, first person I thought of, guess, Alan. And so I called Alan and I called Jerry Roberts, and between the three of us, we went over for a month each and covered the clinic there. I have to say that Alan and I have talked about this many times. It was one of the greatest experiences of my medical career. And Alan felt the same. We worked with the most wonderful people in very primitive circumstances in this little border town. But we met some amazing people, had some great times, did some great medical care, dealt a lot with death. People were dying of shell wounds and gunshots and malaria. I mean, any of you docs, colleagues of mine who've been working overseas know what that's like. Alan and I shadowed each other over many years. He was medical director, I was medical director, back and forth, president of medical staff. But I always looked up to Alan. Everybody said it here, and I'll say it too. He was the smartest guy I ever met. Was there anything he couldn't do? And I would love to ask him questions because he always had the right answer. You know, I could go to a textbook, but it was far easier just to call Alan. He provides superb leadership to our medical community and to our hospital. He was so appreciated and respected by all his colleagues. I never saw Alan get in a flap. He was always calm and deliberate and wise and caring. He was a man who had endless capabilities and talents, and yet was always gracious and kind and always self-effacing. He didn't have an egotistic bone in his body. He was a humble man and a very wise man. It was a real privilege for me to spend hours with Alan in his home, with Joan, and later in hospice. And I would try and get in there every couple of weeks and just spend a couple of hours. Joan, it was a real honor to do that. And we would reminisce, and we'd talk about the 45 years that we shared together. We would talk about faith and hope, and what about the life after this? And Alan was a man who had a deep but very quiet and very real faith, and I respected him highly for that. We talked about many things. Lorna and I lost a granddaughter 2 years ago with leukemia. She was diagnosed at 8 and died 4 weeks after her 10th birthday. Alan was so kind, and Joan was so kind in those days. They reached out to us when we had a need. And so it was an honor for me to reach out to Alan and to Joan, because that's what friends do. That's what community is all about. So we would talk and we would laugh and sometimes get a little bit emotional talking things, but in all of that time together, we shared a common theme, and that was gratefulness. Grateful for this medical community, grateful for life, grateful to God, grateful for loved ones, grateful for community, for the medical community. Over and over, Alan said to me that he had loved his life. He loved Joan. He loved his kids, Katie and Drew. He loved his grandkids. He loved his medical career at Hilltop Clinic and Peace Arch Hospital. He loved his motorcycle. Go figure. But he felt that he had lived the perfect life. And I agree. It's remarkable. We are so privileged. Alan was brilliant, highly competent, a great doc, a leader, a visionary, an intellect, so many talents. But to me, he was just my friend. Alan, I will miss you. But I'll see you in heaven one day. And we'll sit down and we'll talk about the good old days in White Rock. And we'll still be the A team and the B team. Joan, Lorna and I love you. And we will continue to pray for God's peace and blessing and comfort and encouragement in the days ahead. And know that we will be there for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. I wasn't going to share this story, but I am now. When Glenn mentions Cambodia and Thai border, many of you might know this story, but because of Alan's intense love of that area, of the knowledge of the caves in Thailand, of the knowledge of the scuba industry, and probably read books and studied courses and went to all sorts of things to understand what breathing equipment was available. Alan lived and breathed every moment from CNN when the soccer team was caught kilometers back in the cave and understood the rescue process. And some of it was maybe drug-induced, but his brain was always working. And as he worked through and heard CNN and the recovery process, he also suggested all these boys were going to have training, be sedated, and have masks on them that would self-empty of air or of water if they got filled with air. And after the rescue, that's all you heard was how the masks that were used emptied of water automatically and helped these boys recover from the cave. He was in his bed and honestly believed he was there, but his brain worked through all the scuba issues, all the cave issues, and it was just Alan working his normal life and normal magic. Yvonne McLeod is going to speak next, and Yvonne came to Hilltop Medical in 2000, Y2K year, and told me many times that her job simply was herding cats. For the docs in this room, you understand that. Alan helped her in the computer field, and as you heard from Dorothea, the courses he took and the studies he had. He was the only doctor I knew, as his accountant, he was the only doctor I knew who, after a theft in his home, a break-in and theft in his home, he relaxed. His computer was backed up, it was password protected. Not sure how many could say that here. But for now, we're going to introduce Yvonne, who was boss to Alan.
Thank you, Joan, for asking me to say a few minutes. Boy, what do you say? What do you say? So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm from the B team. I think we share. I was Alan's clinic manager. Alan always referred to me as his boss. Joan's laughing. No matter where we were, whether we were in a restaurant, at a medical event, or a conference, Alan made a point of telling everybody and anybody, and even the waitress, this is my boss. And I was always struck by that, because he was my boss. But he even forgot my name after about a year. I was never Yvonne. I was always the boss. Every phone call was, hey, boss. It just became my name. I started thinking I was Bruce Springsteen after a while. But anyway, for those of you who know Bruce Springsteen, he's the boss. You can look it up. You can Google it. When Joan asked me if I would say a few words about Alan, there were so many things that came to my mind to talk about. Alan was an accomplished individual, a man with a great mind, an avid adventure seeker, as well as a great humanitarian. However, I knew him best as a doctor. One of the things that struck me about Alan was that he was never on time. His staff used to phone me and say, do you know where Dr. Pretty is? He was supposed to be here 45 minutes ago. And I'd call him on his cell phone and find out that he was still at the hospital doing his rounds. Probably talking to the nurses, right, Teresa? Yeah. You said it. I knew exactly where he was. And when he was supposed to be in the walk-in clinic at 12 o'clock and it was 12:30, he was 30 minutes late. I'd call him again and he'd say, well, I'm just leaving the office at Ocean Park and I'm on my way. I remember once telling Alan, I thought it would be best if he would start his clinic at 9:30 instead of 9, because it would be better for his patients. And he looked at me with that smile and he said, yeah, that would be fine, but I probably won't get there till 10. And that's a true story. And I knew then that I was lost on trying to keep Alan on a schedule. I knew it was over. But what I didn't realize was that time was not something Alan measured like most of us. Most of us are always consumed with time. Being on time, not wasting time, how precious time is, how much time we have, but to Alan, time was none of these. Time was all about giving, not coveting. Alan gave his time to everyone who asked for it, whether it was his patients, who he would spend more time in a visit with, or when needed, or at the hospital, talking with the family of patients that needed to be listened to or heard, and especially to his colleagues and to his staff, who he always had time for. I think Alan understood the meaning of time more than most. Time should not be a precious commodity that we seek to control, but should be given freely to those who need it most. And for this lesson from Alan, I will always be grateful. Alan, I was proud to be your boss, but most of all, I'm proud to be your friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. And I think it goes without saying, I kind of thought Yvonne would cover this a bit, but Alan led this community into the digital world and got us into the 21st century with medical records and electronic records. It was an incredible amount of work, but dedication, and Yvonne was one of the first to notice that and appreciate it, as were other docs at the hospital. Alan inherited some of his dad's accounting genes. Jack was an accountant, and Alan would always come to me as his accountant from about 1975, 76 on. He'd have his taxes done. And he was kind of upset if I told him it was like $100 out. He knew what his taxes were. He knew what next year's installments were going to be. He was way ahead of the curve. And then 1990 came. 1990 was the year of family trusts, incorporations. Alan was lost. His world was mine. And Katie learned about horses. Next up, we have Gil Simpson, who was absolutely loved by Joan and by Alan, a friend of many, many years, a beautiful relationship, and that is going to be shared now. If Gail would take a few moments. Gail. Another teacher of Alan.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so I wasn't nervous till 2 seconds ago, and I'm sure you can see my heart beating. Alrighty. I am so privileged to speak about my friend Alan. Joan and I met when I was 19, so like 20 years ago, whatever, right? And we're soulmates when we met. And I just love her so much. I often say, marry me, but, well, we can't, so. And Alan quickly found this place in my heart that was none other. It's one of those people that you meet. There's not many words that are spoken, but you just get each other. I could tell you tons of stories, but I'm just going to choose a few stories to tell you. Alan he was just so funny. His sense of humor, his dry sense of humor was funny. And I'm going to bounce around because I'm just going to bounce around. That's just what I do. But over the 40 years that I knew Alan, there wasn't a time that I didn't go over to his home and he was there. And he'd say, come on, Gail, just sit here. I'm going to read the medical journal to you. And then once he was tired, it was quantum physics. And I would say, okay, we'll do that. So we had lots of fun with that. I loved how much pride he had with Kate and Drew, and we had many, many talks about that through the 40 years, and also at the end, just how incredibly proud he was of his children and of Joan. He loved that woman so much. So a couple quick little funny stories. I don't know how this started or when, but Alan started referring to me as his second wife. It was just kind of this joke because I was always around. But we would be out places, and Joan would be on one side and I'd be on the other. And in his straight, as somebody said, flat line sense of humor. He'd say, this is my wife, Joan, and this is my second wife, Gail. And people would be, you could see their minds. So is she married to that one? Is that a divorce? Are they together? Are they in a polygamy marriage? What's going on? And Alan would let the person sit in it for a little while, and then he would break into that little smirk, and he'd say, no, really, she's just Joan's best friend. So he was so funny. Another little funny story, about a year ago, we were out doing some errands, and he'd been diagnosed, and we were just out doing a whole bunch of things. Joan was driving. And all day long, we were out for the day doing things, and Alan would say, hold my hand. And I'm like, oh, yes, I'll hold your hand. Of course I'll hold your hand. I thought he was unsteady, and so every time we got out of the car, we'd go in. He held my hand. We went over to Drew and Ashley's to pick up some papers. I walked him to the door. I held his hand. Probably for 5 hours. At the end of the day, he goes, you know what? I didn't need to hold your hand. I just wanted to hold it all day. So he was just so funny. I just loved that about him. So just a few little things. Alan was fascinated as a young child. Even when he was in grade 5, he read a whole set of encyclopedias. Honestly, he was just an absolutely incredible man. When they were building their house down on Marine Drive, probably many of you know about this, he decided that he was going to do a small renovation, which turned into rebuilding the whole house. And Joan came home. He had gone to work, and Joan came home one day, and the door was boarded up with a note saying, Joan, if you want to get in, you need to go downstairs and get a hammer and take out the nails, and then you can go in the house. So just really funny things like that. When he was building a concrete wall, like a retaining wall, needed to be built in the big house down on Terry Road. So he decided that he would learn how to build this 9-foot wall, and he would hire someone to help him. So Alan was never a man that really wanted to have other people do things for him. He just wanted to dig in there and do it himself, and I so loved that about him. Somebody talked about his kayak and how beautiful that kayak was. He told Joan that he was he wanted to have a kayak. So he told Joan, he said, I'm just gonna have some things delivered. And she's thinking, well, the kayak's gonna show up. Nope, a kayak kit showed up, and Alan built this kayak. And it is absolutely beautiful. So last about maybe 3 weeks before Thanksgiving last year, I had said to Alan, I'm gonna have Thanksgiving dinner this year. And I had a dining room table, and I said, I really want to build like some wood benches, like live edge wood benches. And he said, well, tomorrow we're going to Rona, and we're going to do blah, 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 blah. So he takes me to Rona, and seriously, in my head, I'm thinking, into Rona, buy the wood, buy the stands. We were an hour and a half in Rona as he explained wood to me. And now I just have this love for wood because he explained how it grew from the earth, and then he gives life to us, and then we get to take it home. So we bought cherry wood, 2 pieces of beautiful cherry, and these little, what do you call those, stands to put it on. And I'm thinking we're going to whip this thing up in an afternoon. 2 weeks later, after days and days of sanding, seriously, he had me, and he would just sit on his little chair because he wanted me to build them, and the next day I went over and I said, I cannot lift my arm today. I will not be sanding. We sanded those things probably for a week, honestly, and then we varnished them, but he told me that because the next day was Thanksgiving, that I could take them home and have them for Thanksgiving, but I needed to bring them back one day and we would finish them up. But we didn't get to do that, but I get to have those 2 beautiful pieces of woodwork in my home that speak to me every day, and I hear Alan saying, yep, one more coat, Gail, one more coat. Like I said, he just wanted to do everything. Joan and I were making a list the other day of the things that he did. He built a full kitchen, he built a kayak, he built line chairs, he built a pantry, he did custom design cabinets for Drew and Ashley in their kitchen. He assisted in the architects in Terry Road, he built a wood dock, he became a tile setter, he put in fireplaces. He was instructor of computers. He was a master in wiring. He did his own plumbing. He did rentals for friends. It goes on and on and on. One thing that he was such a friend. Wasn't he just such a friend? When my parents weren't well, I would call him and say, yeah, I'm a bit concerned about Dad today. And he'd say, yeah, no problem. I'll hop on a motorcycle and go out and see him. He was instrumental in helping my son when he was very ill, and he bent over backwards and went above and beyond for my son. When I started my company many years ago, teaching painting, Joan and him would come, and these are some of his paintings on the mantle here, and he was always the star pupil, but he'd always come and he'd say, so am I going to model today? and I would say, do you want to? And he'd say, if you want to pay me. So we always had this little joke. But Joan was telling me when we were reminiscing about this that when they moved to White Rock and he was going to work here as a doctor, he asked Joan to sign him up for some charcoal sketching classes. And she said, yeah, I'll sign you up. So when he arrived, it was a charcoal sketching class, and the nude model was one of his patients. So it was quite amusing to him. And of course, he just plowed right through it and did his thing. I could tell you lots and lots of stories about him. I had to keep crossing things off my list because everyone's touched on them. I am privileged. I am a better woman because of Alan Pretty. I will miss him, and I truly love that man. Truly love that man. Thank you.
Are you getting a common theme here? Thank you very much, Gail, and I can't let another moment go by without pointing out that Liz, his sister, has come from Calgary. I pointed out again, and Liz, this must be all resonating very well with you, and the memories keep floating back. I want to tell you how much Joan appreciates having you here today, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to talk to you today. Next, we're going to have Grace and add a duet with Mike sing Hallelujah. I want you to know that Hallelujah was written by Leonard Cohen in 1984. Everyone's got their own interpretation of Hallelujah, but Katie Lang, who perhaps sang the song second best to what Grace will now do with Mike, considered the song to be about having human desire while searching for spiritual wisdom.
My husband Ken, his family, and Alan's family, his mother, and they were in the same neighborhood, probably within a block of each other. So they've known each other more than 65 years. And Alan's mother, Helen, I call her Mrs. Pretty, and she and my mother-in-law, Effie, were best friends. And I remember whenever they were together, there were always laughter. They really, really stayed good friends for so long. And the year that I got married to Ken in 1977, so that was more than 40 years ago, I think Alan and Joan were at our wedding, but I don't remember, until they came to visit my father-in-law, who had colostomy surgery, and he was recovering at home, and he had an infection. So Alan and Joan came to visit, and they treated my father-in-law, Phil, right there. You know, how many doctors really go around visiting people at home? And that was, I thought, wow, I was very touched. And Joan brought her homemade fruitcake, so it must have been around the Christmas time, and Mrs. Pretty and Effie were so different, so different. But they stayed so close together, and Mrs. Pretty even bought an apple tree when we first bought our home, in Surrey. And Alan was always there whenever our family faced health crisis. And he was not our family doctor, and Ken could always count on him. And even waking up at 6:00 a.m. to ask him to meet him at the Peace Arch Emergency, and Alan would be there waiting for him. And 8 years ago, we had a most devastating loss. My son had cancer, but again, we relied on Alan. We called him, and he was there for us. And Alan was the most caring, genuine, down to earth. And in our years, before we had kids, we used to go to White Rock. And they had a house on the hill, just a little tiny cottage. And we didn't call them, but after dinner, we'd just go there for a drive. And Ken would just say, "Is doctor in the house?" And they would just greet us. And we got to know each other occasionally over that cup of tea. And, I just want to tell you something, that I have 3 sons. And my youngest son, when he was born, we were on our way to Vancouver. And with a foot of snow, the traffic on the highway was just not moving. And my husband found the police patrol and told him, "This is third baby. We have to get to the hospital." So he escorted us, and we were on our way to Delta Hospital. And then we found out there was no maternity ward. So, again, Ken called Alan. "We're going to be at Peace Arch Hospital. Are you going to be there?" He was there waiting for us again. So, he was always there, just as a friend and as a caring doctor. And in our darkest years after our loss, we lost touch for a few years. And then we found out Alan was at Irene Hospice. And I've been a hospice volunteer worker, and we had to visit Alan. We went there, and he got to see my son, whom he delivered 32 years ago. And how many times you get to see a doctor who delivered you. So it was very precious time. And because I do music for the hospice, and we wanted to do some. And so Ken asked Alan, "Who's your favorite singer?" And he said, "Barbara Streisand." "Oh, what song?" And he said, "Evergreen." "Oh, did you ever hear Grace sing?" He said, "Yes, at your house. We had a karaoke party." That was so many years ago, I even forgot. But he said, "I sang Evergreen on karaoke." And then Katie and Drew were just little kids, So that was a very precious memory that he even remembered, right? So I just want to say to Alan and Joan that we appreciate their friendship and how wonderful he was to us in our family crisis. Ken called on him many a times. And so we just want to thank you, Joan, giving me a chance to speak. And we love you. We adore you.
Music to you.
going to have Drew and Katie come up. Katie, you all know, searched long and hard for Chris, and it's not what you think. I mean, seeing him at the end of the bar and falling in love immediately, and they go out. It wasn't until she found out his last name was Gentilini she was willing to give up her last name. Drew and Katie were both born on May 10th, and a lot of you would think, well, gee, what? What did I say? Oh. Well, that's why. What was your birthday? That kills my story, kills my joke, shows how little I know. Anyway, what I do know is that after Family Trust Days, they came along, and Katie found new love of Sapphire, Priam, and Brigade. Now, I suspect there was a little bit of foot-itis in that, and the horses kept on getting bigger. I don't know what was wished after. But I suspect the family trust laws have changed, and Alan was always in amazement that the family trust would work for both Drew and Katie in that manner. I, right now, hope that a lot of you enjoyed the slideshow, and you will have seen in that inserted, for a reason that I hope Katie and Drew both share, some hummingbird pictures and some butterfly pictures, and they have special meaning to both Katie and Drew. So I'm hoping they come forward and talk about a lot of their stories, but also include the story of the butterflies and of the hummingbirds. Katie and Drew.
All right, well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. This is amazing. I know it's incredible how many friends Dad's gained through the years, and seeing everyone here means a lot to our family and to Dad, and I know he'd be truly honored. So, sorry if the one thing that's kept me strong through these extremely hard times is holding on to these amazing memories that Dad's filled our lives with. I'd really love to share just a few of them with you all. Ever since we came into this world, our Dad has been there by our sides, cheering us on through life. He was more than just our dad. He was our best friend and our biggest fan. Growing up, our parents did everything with us, and anyone who knows my dad is not surprised to hear that. He was one to fill life with every experience possible, teaching us that you need to live your life to the very fullest, pursue your dreams, and make sure you find happiness in anything and everything that you do. Our trips to Hawaii, they were extremely special to us. I can remember Dad's smile when I brought back my geckos, or what I called lizards. I had a little bit of a speech impediment. I brought them back to the hotel and put them in these little cages that I made for them. I'm pretty sure he felt extremely bad for the little guys, but he knew how obsessed I was with making friends with them, so he just let it happen for a couple hours until I was forced to let them loose. I remember Drew and I dancing out all of our energy with these ridiculous hula skirts and Hawaiian outfits as Mom and Dad acted as our proud audience. Good videos to prove that, I think, somewhere. So many special memories were created from these trips. Year after year, my parents found time to take us away with them. Looking back now, I have no idea how they found the time to do that with their busy schedules, but they made it happen and we loved every little bit of it. The horses. Dad wanted absolutely nothing to do with buying me a horse. He knew what that would create. After begging and crying for 2 years, I think some of his friends know all about that, writing Post-it notes all over everything in his view, his briefcase, computer, hot tub, he finally said yes to buy me my first horse, Sapphire. And then a second somehow came into the picture, that was Priam, and then a third. He was my #1 fan, sitting in the stands during every horse show, standing outside after I finished every class to tell me how great I did. Hold it together. My absolute favorite story of my dad is how he helped me get my horse Sapphire ready for a show. Some of you know this story. While I was getting my hair and makeup done before my class, Dad went and took Sapphire out of her stall, brushed her, tacked her up, putting her saddle and bridle on, was even attempting to braid her mane and tail, which he does not know how to do. I walked around the corner, quickly realizing that was not my horse. Yep, we shared a very huge laugh that day, including the owner of that horse. She was cool with it. Dad was allergic to dogs. Wasn't really supposed to be around them at all. The fact that we had 3 to 4 dogs at once really just showed how far he'd go to have his family the absolute happiest they could be. Although, he definitely crossed the line when the 3rd dog tried to sneak into bed with Mum and him. I think 2 or 3 were in there at the same time. Yep. Our breakfast dates kept us close through the years. When Drew and I were really young, we would all take the bikes out as a family to the Dutch Panacoke House for breakfast. Through the years, Mum and Drew lost interest in super early breakfast dates, and Dad knew I would roll out of bed and go to breakfast with him. Which, let me tell you, when the teen years hit, that wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. We kept a Dutch as a tradition for so many years. He had this ratty old Dutch points card he would give to the server every time, and it must have been about 10 or 15 years old at the time. The server kept asking, "Do you want a new card?" Every single time. Every server was like, "This thing is in 10 pieces. It's time for a new card." He had tape around it and everything, and he always said, "No, thanks. Let's just keep using this one until it doesn't work anymore." Every time I saw that card, it made me realize how many breakfast dates we've had. Watching his smile as he gave it to the server gave me so much joy. I'm pretty sure that's why he held on to that thing for so long. As many of you know and have heard here with the speeches, Dad would go to Hay River to take care of patients out there. He would leave for weeks at a time, and I missed him, so I decided to go with him. I went out there for a couple weeks with him. He took me ice fishing. I have no idea how he got me on board with that, considering we were not putting those fish back in the water. Bit of an animal lover over here. What a cool experience, though. We cooked some of the fish in an ice shanty or a hut on the ice while listening to these amazing stories of the fishermen who took us out. Dad introduced me to the sled dogs up there. Or sled dogs, I guess. I was kind of expecting these beautiful, well-fed huskies, and that was absolutely not the case. I turned to him and said, "Dad, I'm calling the SPCA." He said, "Kate, this is the SPCA." Needless to say, my dad left me there during some of the days so I could help feed and care for them. I came home one day. We stayed in this little, trailer or mobile home. I came home one day in this brand new white snow jacket he bought me, covered in blood. And he goes, "Oh my God, what happened?" He had that grin on, that same grin that he always has on his face when he knows he's going to get an entertaining answer from one of his kids. I think some of you have seen that one. I responded with, "Oh, it's just blood from cutting up the buffalo meat to feed all the dogs." His reaction was definitely one to remember on that day. Entertaining. He got me out cross-country skiing on that trip. He introduced me to the whole hospital. Some very memorable patients, nurses, and doctors. Some of who are here today. Thank you for being here. Ever since I was young, I was so proud of my dad. As we walked through the hospitals and clinics, he held my hand and introduced me to all his friends, colleagues, and patients. There are so many memories we could share. These are just a few. We feel extremely lucky to have had these amazing years we did with Dad. I know his friends and our family feel the same. I know he's watching over all of us right now, just as he did when he was here. Ever since Dad's passing, there's been this feeling of his presence around me that's kept me strong. Chris got me out of the house that day and we went for a long walk. I was trying to understand why. I was filled with anger and sadness until all these beautiful butterflies kept running into my face, to be honest. They were running right into me. Chris was right there with me. They were all over. I didn't really understand it. I got slightly distracted as I've never seen so many at once like that. They somehow calmed me down and changed my perspective. Once I got home, I looked up the meaning of butterflies, and this is what I learned. Butterflies are a sign from deceased loved ones that their spirit lives on. really wanted to share that with all of you. Thank you everyone for being here to celebrate Dad's life. I know he would only want smiles and happy memories on this day, so let's just do that. Thank you.
And what Tom was trying to share earlier was that actually Katie's husband is born on May 10th, 1985, which is my exact year, birth date, and month that we were born. And we just found out earlier today we were actually born 15 minutes apart on that morning. So I don't know if that's a sign to stay away or come closer. So, and you know, I know my father's looking down right now and he's just saying, wow, what a crowd. And you know, we are very taken back, and thank you, Tom, for everything today. Yeah. Some of my fondest memories of my dad are the evenings we'd go out and play baseball for hours. He loved playing ball and he loved seeing me play ball. One of my favorite memories with my dad are the bright and early mornings on the trips as a family that we'd go riding the canal boats and we'd go tour the England castles. I still remember that big smile of his, and I keep hearing it all day. I know we all do. After my father's diagnosis, I remember one day walking into his room, in his bedroom, and we sat down on the bed. We were alone, and I said, Dad, we'll be playing ball together someday soon. And he looked up at me with that smile and he said, I know we will, Drew. My father was the strongest, most courageous man I've ever known, and he really was our rock. This is one of those times that you don't know what you have until it's gone. He never sugar-coated things, and he would always tell you how it was. He loved putting heads together for solutions or new ideas when needed. He was such an intelligent man and loved learning new things whenever possible, from traveling to Spain to learn Spanish or to sharpening his computer skills by taking a computer coding course at the age of 72. He was constantly learning. I was there for my father's diagnosis and his very last breath, while holding his hand, and I can tell you he did not cry or complain once. In fact, he sat us all down and he said, guys, if I could do this all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. He traveled the world, he married the girl of his dreams, he saw his children get married, held his grandchildren, and so much more. He had his career as a successful physician and a passion for medicine and helping others. My dad would always be the first one to jump at taking Jaden and Kennedy down to the beach for ice cream or watching the trains pass by. We always knew a train was coming when my son would yell out, choo-choo. I remember one time at hospice, this was a few months back, and I walked into my dad's room. Nobody else was in there. My dad was just sleeping peacefully. The sun was shining in, and he was fast asleep. So I held his hand, and I said, Dad, I love you. I said this slowly over and over again. And at that time, he mumbled something. And so I got down close to him. I said, Dad, what was that? And he got up, or he woke up, and he said, do you know how proud we are? And he went back into a deep sleep. I want to take a moment to share with you one of the most special moments I've ever had in my life. I got a couple pictures here. I'm going to put them over to the side. And as I was walking it up to the hospice one day, a hummingbird was sitting in a tree. And I took a picture. And I didn't think too much of it until I went back 3 days later, and what looked to me as if the same hummingbird was sitting in the same spot. So I ran in to get my mom and to bring her outside to show her. And at that time, another hummingbird came, started flying above us as they were playing, and my mom and I just held each other. On the day my father passed, my mom was holding one hand, I was holding the other. After he took his last breath, I went into a seating room to call my sister, and this was overlooking a garden. And at this time, the most amazing thing happened to me. While I was sitting there on the phone with Katie, a hummingbird flew up to the window, and I got a picture of this. Hummingbird flew up to the window, and it started fluttering back and forth while it was looking at me. This happened for several minutes, and there's no doubt that this was a sign, and I just had this comforting feeling that everything would be okay. I want to thank everybody at Elaine Thomas for the hospice care that you gave my father. You truly are angels. And also, I want to tell my mom how much I love you for how strong you've been. There wasn't a day that my mom didn't leave his side. And do you remember all the chocolate shakes we'd give him from McDonald's? He loved them. I'll never forget that smile. And so I just want to thank all his friends and family and everybody that's here. And right now he's looking down on us and he's saying, just enjoy yourself. I'm at peace and everything will be okay.
Has anyone got the feeling there were triplets involved? I think two of them were always in hiding, and there were three Allens out there. The life was amazing. Allen right now would be in pajamas saying goodnight, everybody. He'd be leaving Joan to wrap up. Joan wants me to pass on a huge thank you to all who have attended today, the many who could not attend, and the countless thousands of patients, babies, and friends that have made Allen's life. You've all enjoyed Allen's interim website, which has been up under forevermissed.com and with a / Dr. Allen Pretty. There is now a replacement website, which is www.drallenpretty.com, doctor spelled out, not DR. .ca, not com? Okay. It's always good to hear it twice. www.drallenpretty.ca, which includes stories and the slideshow from today. The video will be uploaded, I believe, and you can, your stories are invited. You are welcome to read the other stories, and all of this will be shared with Joan and the family forevermore. So I can't say enough about the stories that I've heard today. I can't say enough about how many people have attended and how much love there is in this room right now. So I will wish you a good night, but first I'm going to say we have this room till 5 o'clock. Joan would love to meet each and every one of you. Joan is here till 5, and after that we're going to try and leave her in peace with close family members or at Joan's invitation. So if you can see Joan today by 5, that would be very much appreciated. St. Joan, for what you've been through, we love you and we've really enjoyed today. Thank you for putting it on, and thank you all for coming.